This video was created from the Advocates in Action presentation, Disability History Highlights Part 5, HCBS and Person-Centered Supports. It includes 17 slides and runs for 16 minutes. Slide 1, Disability History Highlights Part 5, HCBS and Person-Centered Supports. Created by Advocates in Action, Rhode Island. Slide 2, Quick Review, Separate Isn't Equal. The image on this slide is a newspaper headline from 1999 that says, "Court rules in favor of disabled." The slide also has a colored banner across the top with streamers and confetti to indicate that this was a cause for celebration. We talked about the Olmsted decision, which the Supreme Court ruled on in 1999. Olmsted was, and continues to be, the most significant civil rights decision for people with disabilities in U.S. history. One of the most important takeaways from Olmsted is that it reinforced the Americans with Disabilities Act's integration mandate. Take a moment and see if you can remember what the integration mandate is or says. The integration mandate says that entities which are open to the public, including state governments, cannot segregate people simply because they have a disability. Instead, they must provide services in the least restrictive environment. Slide 3, Quick Review, RI's 2014 Consent Decree. The image on this slide is a gavel and a scroll of paper with the words, Consent Decree. Last week, we talked about the 2014 Consent Decree that Rhode Island entered into with the Department of Justice. Take a moment and see if you can remember what the state agreed to do in this precedent-setting settlement to uphold the integration mandate. The DOJ found that sheltered workshops and segregated employment programs violated the integration mandate of the ADA. Rather than going to court and fighting the DOJ findings, Rhode Island agreed to end sheltered workshops and segregated day programs. Instead, they promised to provide individualized, person-centered supports in integrated community settings. Slide 4, An even bigger Olmsted ripple effect. There are 3 images on this slide. Image 1 is a photograph of a man who uses a wheelchair sitting at home while working on a computer and petting his dog. Image 2 is a photograph of a water dripping into a clear surface and creating a ripple effect. Image 3 is a photograph of 3 children playing at a public park. Notice that the child in the middle has Down syndrome. In our last class, we talked about how the Olmsted created a ripple effect. In other words, it acted like the drop of water you see on this slide, where a few drops created a lot of waves. Today we'll look at another ripple effect from the Olmsted decision, the Home and Community-Based Services Settings Final Rule, or HCBS. Congress published this rule in 2014 and included 10 specific requirements that HCBS providers must follow when offering this type of Medicaid service. Slide 5, HCBS Requirements and Rhode Island DD Services. This slide shows the following images below a large umbrella. Image 1 is a logo for the Department of Behavioral Health Care, Developmental Disabilities and Hospitals, or BHDDH, and the Division of Developmental Disabilities. Image 2 is a cartoon of a hand holding a bag of money to represent DD funding. Image 3 is a cartoon of a clipboard with pages that say, My Goals next to a bullseye to represent a service plan. Image 4 is a cartoon handshake between 2 people to represent an agreement. Finally, Image 5 is a stick figure person raising their hands in victory with the words, My Success. Before we go any further, you should know that Medicaid is federal funding. Each state receives a certain amount, which they combine with their own funding to pay for various public services. In Rhode Island, all the services funded through the Division of Developmental Disabilities are considered home and community-based, which means they must follow the HCBS Final Rule. If you remember only one thing from our classes about disabilities rights, remember the HCBS rule. HCBS is all about person-centered services, and the person in the center is you. Slide 6, HCBS Requirements and Class Fun Work. The images on this slide show screenshots from each of the 10 HCBS cartoon videos on our class webpage. In this lesson, we'll be looking at the 10 HCBS requirements. We asked everyone to watch these videos for fun work. If you haven't already done so, please visit our class page and check them out. As you think about the services that you or someone you know receives from the Rhode Island Division of Developmental Disabilities, keep this in mind. If the supports and the services you receive don't follow the HCBS rule, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, or CMS, can stop paying them. So yeah, it's a big deal. In the next 10 slides, we'll look at what the official requirement says and explain what they mean. Slide 7, HCBS. Requirement 1, access to the community. The image on this slide is a snapshot from the cartoon for Requirement 1. Requirement 1 says a setting must be integrated in and support full access to the greater community, including opportunities to seek employment and work in competitive integrated settings, engage in community life, control personal resources, and receive services in the community, to the same degree of access as beneficiaries not receiving Medicaid HCBS. In other words, you need to receive HCBS services in integrated community settings and not in segregated institutional locations. Slide 8, HCBS. Requirement 2, choice of setting. The image on this slide is a snapshot from the cartoon for Requirement 2. Requirement 2 says a setting is selected by the beneficiary from among setting options, including non-disability specific settings and an option for a private unit in a residential setting. The setting options are identified and documented in the Person-Centered Service Plan and are based on the beneficiary's needs, preferences, and, for residential settings, resources available for room and board. Human translation: you need to have a choice of where you receive services. You cannot simply be placed somewhere. By the way, as we look at the language around the HCBS rule, you notice that it refers to people who receive this service as beneficiaries. This is because HCBS services are a form of Medicaid, and Medicaid is an insurance program. Slide 9, HCBS. Requirement 3, right to privacy. The image on this slide is a snapshot from the cartoon for Requirement 3. Requirement 3 ensures a beneficiary's rights of privacy, dignity and respect, and freedom from coercion and restraint. This means the agency that provides your HCBS services needs to keep your information private and to make sure you're treated with dignity and respect. Slide 10, HCBS. Requirement 4. Right to be independent. The image on this slide is a snapshot from the cartoon for Requirement 4. Requirement 4 says HCBS services should optimize, but not regiment, the beneficiary's initiative, autonomy, and independence in making life choices, including but not limited to daily activities, physical environment, and with whom to interact. Autonomy means having control over your own life. Requirement 4 says your HCBS services should respect your life choices and support you to live your life the way you want. In other words, those who support you should ask you what you want and how they can support you to reach that goal, rather than telling you what to do. Slide 11, HCBS. Requirement 5, the right to choose your services and supports. The image on this slide is a snapshot from the cartoon for Requirement 5. Requirement 5 says your HCBS services should facilitate beneficiary choice regarding services and supports and who provides them. This means that you, the person receiving services, should pick the ones you want and the agency you want to provide them. Agencies shouldn't just assign staff to work with you. You have a say in who you want to work with you and who you don't want working with you. Slide 12, HCBS. Requirement 6, tenant provisions. The image on this slide is a snapshot from the cartoon for Requirement 6. Requirement 6 applies to HCBS residential services. It says that individuals who live in a provider-operated residence, such as a group home, have the same protections as other renters under tenant/landlord law. These protections mean that your agency can evict you without giving notice and following proper legal channels. If you live in a HCBS setting where landlord-tenant laws may not apply, such as a shared living arrangement, the state must ensure that you still have a lease, residency agreement, or other form of written agreement that provides similar legal protections. Slide 13, HCBS Requirement 7, Privacy at Home. The image on this slide is a snapshot from the cartoon for Requirement 7. Requirement 7 applies to HCBS residential services. It outlines things that need to be in place to make sure residents feel comfortable calling the place they live home sweet home. Requirement 7 can be summed up by answering the question, does this place feel like home? Here are a few examples of things a residential HCBS provider must do to meet this requirement. 1. Residents have a key to their front door and the right to decide which staff can also have a key. Note, even when staff have a key, they should knock first and respect that fact that they're working in another person's home. 2. Residents have a choice of roommates. You should never be automatically assigned to a certain room with a certain person. 3. Residents can furnish and decorate their home. Of course, you still need to follow the lease agreement, but you have a right to make the place you live look like home to you. Slide 14, HCBS, Requirement 8, Schedule and Access to Food. The image on this slide is a snapshot from the cartoon for Requirement 8. Requirement 8 is about HCBS, residential services. It says that residents have the freedom and support to control their own schedules and activities, and to have access to food at any time. In other words, if you live in a group home, the staff there cannot dictate your schedule or a house menu. If you live with other people, you should be considerate of them when planning your own food and schedule, but this doesn't mean you need sacrifice your own goals and the way you've decided to live your life. Requirement 8 is one that seems to get overlooked quite often. We've heard many stories from people who receive HCBS services in group homes who were told they can't go somewhere or do something related to their plan because the home is short-staffed. While you may need to plan ahead if you've been told your home is short-staffed, you also have a right to ask your agency to hire more staff or to rearrange their staffing schedule to accommodate yours. Not having enough staff isn't an excuse. Remember, your agency's works for you. They're getting paid to help you reach the goals in your person-centered plan, which include being part of the community when you want, with the people you want. Slide 15, HCBS, Requirement 9, the right to have visitors. The image on this slide is a snapshot from the cartoon for Requirement 9. This requirement is also about HCBS in residential settings. It says you can invite people to visit in your home if and when you want to. Remember that we should all respect the people we live with. This doesn't mean you can't have visitors, though. And it certainly doesn't mean your agency can prevent you from having them. It's supposed to feel like your home, and having visitors is part of what Home Sweet Home is all about. Slide 16, HCBS, Requirement 10, Accessibility. The image on this slide is a snapshot from the cartoon for Requirement 10. This final requirement is pretty straightforward. It says that residential settings funded under HCBS must be accessible for the people living there. If you use a wheelchair, your home should have ramps, grab bags, and any other features you need. If you're blind, there should be braille signage, equipment that lets you watch movies with descriptive video, audible alarms, and any other features you need. The same holds true for other disabilities and accessibility requirements. If it's not accessible for you, it's not a place you'd call home, and it violates the HCBS final rule. Slide 17, Person-Centered Services. There are 5 images on this slide. The two images on the left are the Department of Justice shield and the Rhode Island state flag. The two images on the right are a photo of man who uses a wheelchair at home and a photo of a girl with Down syndrome playing with friends in the community. The final image, located in the middle on the slide, is a cartoon person standing in the center of a bullseye target. The person has a map marker above them with the words, "I am here." The most important takeaway from the consent decree and the HCBS final rule was that they were both about person-centered services. We'll talk about person-centered services in our next class. You can also learn more about it in one of our Graduate Academy classes. In the meantime, if you receive DD services, now is a good time to make sure you have a copy of your person-centered plan or individualized service plan, aka your ISP. If you don't receive service, you can bring a copy of someone else's plan. This is only for your reference. We won't be looking at anyone's plan, but we will be talking about RI state law and DD regulations regarding individualized service plans, so grab yours and bring it with you the next time we meet.
Produced by Advocates in Action Rhode Island, 2026. Remember, nothing about us without us.